Administration. Adam, welcome committee.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. As stated, my name is Adam Prophet. I am the Secretary for the Department of Administration. I have for you a very brief slide deck. We'll kind of walk through that. I anticipate a lot of today's discussion is going to be more Q&A, should the committee have any questions, but I at least wanted to tee us up with a couple of quick facts so we can walk through this. So we'll start with the Capitol Complex. So Department of Administration is, amongst other things, effectively the landlord for the state. We're the ones that rent out and handle all the state-owned facilities, and for agencies that go into non-state-owned facilities or private lease options, all of those leases run through us, and we have to sign off on those all across the state. One item, and it's not on here, one thing that we've been very mindful of during my tenure as Secretary of Administration is that for any private leased option within Shawnee County, we are not interested in going beyond 5 years. We want to make sure that we don't lock ourselves into anything longer than 5 years, specifically in Shawnee County. I know that there's been conversation over the past 10, 15, 20 years on that, and some of the leases that are on the books for many, many, many years, we're trying to step away from that and review our options and make sure that we can stay nimble as a state. So as it relates to the Capitol Complex rent, what we have on here is what the rent rates are for fiscals 25 and 26. And then also the monumental surcharge. So for any agency that occupies space in the Capitol Complex in a state-owned building, and I've got those buildings listed up there, it's Docking, Eisenhower, Landon, Memorial, Curtis, and the KDHE lab buildings. You can see what the rent rates would be for office space and then also for computer room space. The reason we charge more for computer room space is because the data centers utilize a lot more energy. And there's a lot more that goes into maintaining those and keeping those in good working order. I don't have the storage rates on here, but they're minimal. They're in the $5 per square foot neighborhood for storage. There's also the monumental building surcharge that every agency that occupies space within Shawnee County, no matter if it's state-owned or private lease, pays a monumental surcharge. That's just costs associated with keeping up the maintenance of the State House grounds, Judicial Center, Cedar Crest, and Capitol Complex parking lots. It's important to note that for the base lease, agencies use a variety of funding mixes, whatever is allowable. Some federal dollars, some state dollars, some fee dollars, whatever the case may be for the base rent. For the monumental surcharge, you are not allowed to use federal dollars to pay for that. So that's a key differentiator there. I'll also mention that we are constantly reviewing what this takes. So there might be modifications in future years in terms of what the rent is. And we'll talk about what the rent covers here in a little bit. But on the next slide here, I want to talk about what the total square footage is of state-owned facilities around the Capitol Complex. So this chart shows in that first column, obviously the name of the building, and then you have the total square footage of said building. And the total of all those is about $2.1 million, sorry, I'm also the budget director, so I talk in dollars a lot. 2.1 million square feet of building space within the Capitol Complex. Next to that, you have what's the leasable office space. So that's what we are able to collect rents on for the leasable space. That's 880,000 square feet. So that's about 40% of the total square footage within the Capitol Complex that we, Department of Administration, collect lease payments on. And that'll be important in just a minute. You can see how much vacant office space we have in the next column across each of these buildings, only about 7,300 square feet. Then you have the storage space, and then the vacant storage space, and then the number of IT rooms that are in each of those. Additionally, in the table right below that, you see the number of parking spaces that we have to maintain. So each of the parking lots, we are responsible for making sure that we clear the snow and keep the parking lots in good repair. And then also the number of acres maintained by the OFPM grounds crew. So all the flower beds, all the grass, everything else that comes along with maintaining the grounds. We've got about 53 acres that we're responsible for managing across the Capitol Complex. One note I would make on the Docking State Office building, we have that listed as 276,000 square feet total. That's the total building. That includes the sub-basement, which houses the heat plant for the entirety of the Capitol Complex. It includes the basement level, which is really occupied by our trades. And then it also includes the mechanical penthouse up top, which is where all the HVAC equipment is. So if you only just do floors 1, 2, and 3, which is what I would call the public-facing floors, it's about 153,000 square feet. So it's skewing a little heavy when you include the totality of the building. So on the next slide, we talk about what rent does cover if you're in the Capitol complex. So the short way of saying it is if you rent space within the Capitol complex at a state-owned facility, it's an all-in price. So if you're renting a private lease, you're paying the rent, but you also might be paying taxes. You also might be paying for maintenance. You might be paying for pest control. You might be paying for parking. You might be paying for a whole host of other things that aren't calculated within that square footage rate. In the Capitol complex, if you're leasing from D of A, it's an all-inclusive. So you can, I won't walk through all of these, but it does include things like housekeeping. It includes things like pest control. If you're going to move into a building and you're not in there yet, it includes getting the setup and the build out for that to a reasonable degree. It includes, like we said, snow and ice removal. It includes free parking on the flat surface lots, plus an option to lease a spot in the covered parking garage. So on the next page here, this is a form that we used to, as I understand it, have agencies fill out. We stopped doing it. This was before my time, maybe 10 years ago. And it's something that with Frank Burnham, my deputy secretary over operations, he and I have talked about this. We're going to start asking agencies to fill this out again. What this form is it identifies for any agency that wants to go out on a lease and they're looking at a private lease option, so something that's not a state-owned facility. We're going to ask them to fill out what the base square footage lease amount is, so make up a number, $18 per square foot, and then identify what the anticipated costs are for each of the other components that are not covered by the lease. What we're trying to get to is an apples-to-apples comparison of what your total lease cost is out of a state facility versus what it is in a state facility. One of the key items that I think I failed to mention that we cover as a Capitol complex is all the utility cost. So all the energy, the heating, the water, everything is aggregated across the entirety of the Capitol complex, and that's calculated as part of your base rate. So agencies on the go forward, once we roll this out in the next month or two, are going to have to fill this out. That way it does two things. One, it shows the agency exactly how much they're paying for a facility on an annual basis relative to what it would be in the Capitol complex. And frankly, it keeps my team honest. Make sure that we're setting our rent rates in line with what the market rates might be on an all-in basis. Again, we only collect rents on about 40% of the buildings, but we have to maintain 100% of the buildings. So we get a little bit out of whack there. We take the total cost that it takes to operate the full Capitol complex, we divide that out by the number of square footage of leasable space, and that's how we develop our rent rate. But we also recognize that there might be some other options outside of the Capitol complex. If that works for the agency, great. And we also want to make sure that we're maintaining a competitive place in the marketplace. That's, Mr. Chair, really the end of my prepared comments. If there are other questions the committee might have, I'd be happy to answer those. If I get stuck on something technical, like I said, I've got Frank Burnham with me who might be able to help out if that's okay.
Thank you, Adam. Question, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Adam. Does the Judicial Center pay the monumentals?
We will look into that. It is supposed to be assessed on any building within Capitol complex, but I want to verify before I commit to an answer on that.
Thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did not see, and maybe I overlooked it, furniture. Where does it come and fall in this? Is it leased, or is that owned, or how is that?
All right. So if I may, Mr. Chair, you're talking about the furniture within the buildings?
Yes.
So the Department of Administration largely, if we're building out an area, we're going to include the furniture as part of the build out. If there is a need for additional furniture, and when I say furniture, I'm talking workstations, I'm talking the office walls, I'm talking the cubicle walls, I'm talking the desks, things of that nature. A lot of times agencies are responsible for their own chairs or maybe some of the conference room furniture. Or as you walk into an agency, if they have a waiting area before you get in there, the chairs that are there for the waiting area, that would be the agency responsibility. I'll give an example. As we're getting ready, as we're doing some of the shifting, Department of Commerce is one of the agencies that is going to move over to the Docking State Office building. So in docking, we're going to have everything outfitted and ready to go with the office walls, workstations, cubicles, things of that nature. They'll have to purchase those other items that I talked about. Highway Patrol, we're going to move, when their lease expires, we're going to move them out of their existing space and back into Curtis State Office building, which is being vacated by Department of Commerce. We will outfit that and get that in a spot where they can move in. If there's anything above and beyond what the base would include, they're going to be responsible for purchasing that.
The base furniture itself, the cubicles, the workstations, that's included in?
Yes, sir.
Included in. Okay, thank you.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Capitol Office Complex Space Summary, you list several buildings. The Docking State Office Building, is that the building that's under construction or the previous building?
If I may, Mr. Chair, that is anticipating the new building that will be completed this summer.
Because it lists 73,000 plus leasable office space, and then vacant is nothing. Well, it's all vacant.
So we're assuming in fiscal 26. This is what we're looking at. So we've identified, and frankly, there's a couple thousand square feet that isn't being outfitted, but the vast majority of it's going to be leased. And 73,000 is a leasable space, which means, and as I said, it's about 153,000 of the public-facing space on floors 1 through 3. The rest of it is going to be conference rooms and meeting rooms and training areas and things of the like as well. So the whole building is not going to be able to be office space, and that was the original design.
The Forbes KDHE lab, it says that the building closing soon. Is that state-owned, or have we been leasing it?
Mr. Chair, if I may, that is state-owned. It's actually owned by KDHE. It's not owned by D of A. Okay, it is owned by D of A. They've been leasing it from us. So it's a state-owned facility. We need to figure out what needs to happen with that. We've gone out and gotten a couple of appraisals. One, what the land would be absent the building, and one, what the land would be worth with the building. The issue is that there's going to have to be some asbestos and other, chemical remediation that would happen if we do raise the building, which you're incurring quite a bit of cost when you do that. Right now, without a clear-cut path for anything to move forward there, our plan is to kind of mothball the facility, but we're still going to have to maintain the grounds that are around it. It's a substantial piece of land, but it is owned by the state.
Well, you answered several of my questions going forward on that. Now, the last question, Mr. Chairman. The State House leasable office, it shows nothing. So the press does not pay for their space in the Capitol? We're just giving them the space to write whatever they decide to write about us?
I don't believe we collect any. Okay, $100 annually is what we collect on that. But the legislative spaces and the governor's office spaces, we do not collect rent on. Those agencies don't pay any lease.
I understand not collecting from legislators and other, but the press is a private business, supposedly. Okay, I'm just surprised, Mr. Chairman, that we are, for $100, allowing the press to have nice office space in this Capitol building. That's all of my questions for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just a quick question. I just noticed on the monumental building surcharge, it goes from $330 a square foot to $450. Can you explain why the increase?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Senator. And that's why I caveated earlier that we are going to be reviewing these to make sure they're where they need to be. Again, we take the totality of the cost to operate the entirety of the Capitol complex and what that needs, and then we divide that out between rent and then also monumental surcharge. Quite honestly, as we're bringing docking online in year one, the tenants that are going to move in there are moving from paying Capitol complex rent, so Department of Commerce is paying Capitol complex rent into Capitol complex rent. Secretary of State is in Memorial moving over there, and we're also taking on the lab. So we're taking on a lot of square footage in fiscal 26, and we're not generating new revenue yet. We have plans to backfill with new revenue, but we're taking on more costs without new revenue just yet. So the cost will increase in fiscal 26. Full transparency, I've asked my team to sit down and walk me through exactly every dollar, every penny that goes into the monumental surcharge and where the dollars are going out, with the goal of trying to keep that, get that lower in fiscal 26. I can't commit to a number just yet, but I can commit to you that we're getting meetings on the books to have a very thorough review to make sure we're going in the right direction. We don't want to overcharge.
Other questions? See, now, Adam, I got a couple. So that you mentioned Highway Patrol is going to move over to Curtis?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that'll take some time.
And currently they're paying private rent per month. How much are they paying now over there where they're at? Do you know?
We have it. I don't have it in front of me. It is lower than the $22.50 or $23.50 per square foot that we'll be charging in fiscal 23. Again, That's not an all-in cost though, because there are other costs that we'd have to pay. So it is lower. I would say it's probably below what the current market would bear if they were to renew that lease at a private space right now.
Well, I toured that a few weeks ago or a month ago, whatever it was, but I thought they were paying like a $500,000 a year over there.
It's possible. Again, I'll have to look at it. And they're in a couple of buildings. They're in the Elks building and they also
Right.
occupy
There's
space.
two different
Jayhawk Tower.
spaces.
Yes, sir.
Does the KBI own their office?
They do. Yes, they're in the same facility they've been in for quite some time.
So they own it, so they're not paying rent?
It does not go through Department of Administration.
Okay. And KBI's lab at Washburn, same way?
Correct. That was bonded through the Planning and Building Commission many, many years ago, and we actually paid off that bond early a couple of years ago. And if memory serves correctly, ownership was transferred from Washburn to the state for $1 as part of the agreement that we had.
And looking at leases across Topeka, how long's the longest one? Do you know?
Man, you know, longest. 25 years were some of them that were entered into.
So
some
if we
time
have a
ago.
25-year lease, do you have any idea on how many years are left on that lease?
That's information that we'd be able to pull and get back with Nancy for the committee, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
I think that'd be important, and I've heard through the grapevine that the rents are really accelerating. Have you noticed that?
Some of the leases that we have expiring are what I would say below market level rates right now. So they might have been entered into some time ago and they were a good deal at the time, and now they don't reflect what the market bears. So there are some that are below market rates, which means rents are going up. And we work with agencies on those to identify space that works for them, again, which is why we want to have this cost comparison sheet to show exactly what they're going to get in the private lease space versus what Capital Complex might bring.
That was one of my questions is, you know, what the state's charging for our facilities versus what we're paying on the private sector. Do they pretty much stay with what you're charging at the state level, or?
If you look at just the average base lease price per square foot, it is lower in private space. And it's around $15-ish on average. And again, that's just the square footage space rent. It does not include any other costs they would incur, paying utilities, paying for pest control, paying for housekeeping, paying for parking, some of those things. So in some instances, it makes perfect sense for these agencies to be in some of the outlier areas. We also see some leases that are above the Capital Complex market rates. But again, that might make sense for that agency in terms of what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay, one last question. So over on Kansas, is that ks.gov building over there on the corner?
The 6th in Kansas, the DCF building.
Right, correct. Is that state-owned or is that a rental?
It's a private lease. And that one, I believe, was a longer lease when it was entered into. That was part of DCF leaving docking back in 2015.
I just wondered because that's been like 10 years ago. And so
Yes, that was one of the longer ones.
25, we have 15 years left. Do you ever look at lease purchase options on any of these? Or, I mean, it seems to me like going to be there 25 years, that might have been something that should have been considered.
I wasn't around when that lease was entered into, not to pass the buck, sir, but there are a host of options when you look at leasing. There is a lease to purchase. There's a build for specs. You can buy it up front. There are a number of ways you can do it. It's just what's in the best interest of the state.
Anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, committee, we'll move on. We're going to have an overview of recently completed audits and upcoming audits. Chris Clark, Legislative Post Auditor. Chris, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. To follow up on the last conferee, just for your information, in 2000, I have been here that long. In 2000, we did an audit assessing the benefits of leasing versus owning versus lease to purchase, that sort of thing. So A, it's old, but B, we can certainly do something like that again. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you. I don't know how pertinent that'd be 25 years later here, but it might show that what we could have done if we had done lease purchase versus just leasing, so.
And you can certainly request a refresh of that. We are accepting proposals as we speak, so.
Right. Well, I think that's a really good example, you know, if it, from 2000, you know, it's 25 years, if you had a 25-year lease, and how much more would it have cost you per month to end up with the billing at the end of that time versus not? I mean, I just think it's something, so. But thank you for being here today.
Sure thing. Members of the committee, my name is Chris Clark. I'm the director at Legislative Post Audit, one of your staff agencies. And I'd just like to come around towards the beginning of the session. Wasn't quite as early this year, just to give kind of a brief overview of audits that we did in the last year. This is not all of them, and this is only last year. We've been around since the mid-'70s, I believe. And also to put a plug in, if any of these spark any questions or give you some ideas, please know that this is the time of year to submit audit proposals for consideration. The Legislative Post Audit Committee will meet near the end of session and go through the list of all the proposals that have been submitted from legislators and pick those that they want to pursue. So now's your chance to get your ideas submitted. With that, Mr. Chair, I just plan to go over each one. Would you like me to just have questions at the end?
That'd be fine, or I guess if there's something particular that
Sure.
we can just stop every once in a while and see if there's a question.
Sure thing. And these are in reverse chronological order. So the first one was actually just released last week. This was evaluating the state's water systems operator certification program and wastewater treatment operator certification program. This was a little tiny audit. We call them limited scope audits. And the question that the legislator had that requested this was really just looking into the testing results of these two certification programs. So in Kansas, law requires that all water supply systems and wastewater treatment facilities are supervised by a certified operator. So there's two certifications that the Department of Health and Environment is responsible for. And within those certifications, there's different classes. So between calendar years 2022 and 2024, only about half of the individuals that took the test passed their water supply or wastewater treatment operator exams. Those taking the small system exams, the entry-level exams in either program, had the higher pass rates, and the pass rates reduced for the more complex exams. KDHE officials told us they thought the low pass rates were largely due to examinees not adequately preparing for the exam and didn't indicate poor exam quality. KDHE is currently looking for ways to improve them, such as partnering with community colleges. Next, evaluating the alternative fuel and community service tax credits. This was an economic development evaluation we did. The first question had to do with usage of the alternative fuel tax credit, and the second question had to do with usage and how decisions were made to award the community service tax credit. So first, the alternative fuel tax credit, we found it's been rarely used since 2007, primarily because of statutory changes that limited its usefulness. This credit provides credits to corporations for 40% of the incremental cost of alternative fuel vehicles or 40% of fueling stations installation cost. However, back in 1995, amendments eliminated both electricity as an eligible alternative fuel and individuals as eligible tax credit recipients. So now it's only corporations, and it's only for alternative fuels that do not include electricity. So since '96, the credit has only been used 612 times, and more recently, since 2014, fewer than 5 total corporations have claimed the credit, so it gets very little usage. No other state that we looked at had a credit as restrictive as ours. In fact, Colorado basically does the opposite. They only incent electric fuel vehicles as a tax credit. On the community service tax credit, Commerce has awarded $8 million in community service tax credits during 2023 and 2024, but we found that they didn't fully document their selection decisions. This credit provides credits to individuals, corporations, banks, and insurance companies for donating to certain community service credit projects. Each year, Commerce awards the credits. During 2023 and 2024, as I said, Commerce awarded $8 million in credits to 62 projects in 33 counties. There is more demand than supply, as Commerce only awarded credits to about half of the applicants. During that time period, Commerce reviewed proposed projects based on a scoring process, including application materials and the reviewer's professional judgment. We found that they followed its process for scoring applications, but didn't fully document eligibility checks for the projects we reviewed. Therefore, we can't really determine how Commerce decided which of the 6 projects to award credits. Next, another small limited scope audit looking at the adequacy of the Department of Commerce's pre-employment screening. This arose from questions regarding Commerce's background check process. We reviewed their hiring policies and procedures to determine if they were adequate for staff overseeing financial matters. This was because Commerce hired a staff member in 2020 who pled guilty to felonies in Pennsylvania before being hired by Commerce. Commerce officials told us they were not aware of this staff member's criminal history before hiring him. So we looked into their hiring policies and found they were not adequate to mitigate the risks associated with hiring applicants with a criminal history. This is because Commerce's procedures did not include any type of criminal history check. Commerce officials told us they didn't think they had the authority to perform criminal history checks through the KBI and were unaware of other options. We also found that Commerce didn't adequately document their hiring procedures for a small sample of staff we reviewed. I will note there is currently a bill, House Bill 2342, to address this situation. Next, evaluating staff safety at Osawatomie State Hospital. There were concerns about staff safety. Osawatomie State Hospital is the state's psychiatric facility, and we found it does not adequately ensure the safety and security of its own staff. In terms of physical security, we looked into a number of areas and found they do not have adequate processes regarding the staff patrols of the campus. Those were incomplete and inadequate. We also found there were not enough fire-trained security staff to respond to any fires. They didn't ensure that staff carry around required personal safety alarms and didn't check if staff responded to alarms timely. The key tracking did not include a complete and accurate accounting of all keys. In fact, we found 56 keys were missing, including those with access to patient rooms, and 8 Grand Master Facility keys were deemed lost. Osawatomie does not follow their process to monitor for safety risks and noncompliance with policies, and management lacked effective practices and policies over these security measures. In terms of personnel, we found the hospital had enough nursing staff on patient units to meet their minimum staffing requirements. And the staff generally received the training that they were required to receive. However, the facility depends on a large number of contract nursing staff. Almost 50% of their staff is contracted out nursing staff. And they rely on a large amount of overtime hours to meet those staffing requirements. And this is due to high turnover and vacancy rate. High reliance on these contract staff and overtime results in increased costs and risks for staff safety. In terms of the overall working culture and environment, Osawatomie management had not promoted a culture that prioritized professional boundaries, following guidelines, or ensuring a safe workplace. The management did not set clear expectations for how staff safety and security processes should work, and hasn't collected or used data to proactively identify and fix safety and security problems. Next one was tax increment financing. This one had 3 questions. One was, do tax increment financing projects recover their costs timely? The second question was, how do costs compare to benefits? And finally, is there any effect on school districts? Tax increment financing is a type of economic development tool in which cities use a property tax increment to help finance development projects. The property tax increment is the amount of property tax generated above a base level, which is established when the city creates the district. We contacted the 10 largest cities in Kansas to generate a list of past and present districts. And then from that list, we selected 6 in larger cities to evaluate in depth. We looked into economic costs and benefits. For each of those districts, we estimated the impacts they had on property values, taxes, development, employment, and whether the costs to the city were recovered timely for these districts. We found that 3 of the 6 districts did not recover their costs timely. Further, we found that most of these TIF districts likely experienced economic benefits from increased property value and taxes, increased development, or increased jobs. However, we were unable to directly compare those benefits to the costs because they could not readily be quantified. As far as the effect on school districts, we found that all 6 TIF districts we examined were too small in scale to have a significant negative impact on school district funding. We did an evaluation of STAR bonds. We've done several evaluations of STAR bonds. This one from October looked into the effect of how STAR bonds affect amenities in the area, and does that affect people's location decisions. The STAR bonds program allows local governments to use future sales tax revenue for development or redevelopment projects. Commerce officials expect STAR bonds districts to improve local quality of life. However, they haven't defined or measured that. So we tried to do that. We gathered data to evaluate districts' effects on local quality of life and found that the 6 districts we reviewed grew in these industries that survey respondents said they value. To evaluate the program's effects, we first determined how these 6 districts changed over time in 109 quality of life industries. We then compared that to what recent college graduates said they wanted. We surveyed college graduates about what affected their quality of life and where they chose to live. Survey respondents said social and economic factors other than amenities had more influence on where they wanted to live, such as a job prospect or proximity to family. However, about half of the respondents said more amenities in the 10 quality of life industry groups we asked them about were important to their quality of life. So we analyzed each district and found all 6 districts we reviewed grew or added jobs in the quality of life industries from the time the district was approved to 2023. The districts grew most often in industries that most survey respondents said were important. These include pharmacy, beauty, clothing, those types of operations. However, the 6 districts grew only somewhat in the industry that the largest percentage of survey respondents said were important. That included grocery stores, restaurants, sports venues. We don't know for sure how the STAR bonds program affected these districts, but the infrastructure it financed likely contributed to the patterns we observed. Next, reviewing the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. There were concerns about changes over time in the funding or the amount of money, and changes in the outcomes after the state made some changes to the program. DCF administers TANF. Kansas receives about $102 million in federal TANF block grants annually. This amount has remained relatively stable for the last 20 years. But because of that, this amount has lost an estimated 49% of its purchasing power because of inflation. And one of the programs DCF uses this block grant for is the TANF Cash Assistance Program. In 2015, the state's HOPE Act changed eligibility requirements for TANF cash assistance in Kansas. These changes included things like capping the lifetime assistance to a total of 24 months and reducing the amount of time single caregivers can be exempt from work activity. We found that the TANF cash assistance benefit amount in Kansas has not been updated since 1997. And while that monthly payment remains stable, that means it actually lost about 30% of its purchasing power, since amounts have not been adjusted for inflation. Although the monthly payment remained the same, caseloads have decreased significantly by 77% from 2009 to 2023. Reasons include eligibility changes, wage increases, and inflation. Reviewing Department of Revenue procedures to ensure correct payment of sales and compensating use tax on motor vehicles. This was a concern. Did the department have an adequate process to ensure proper tax collection? So in Kansas, individuals pay 6.5% sales or use tax when purchasing any vehicle that is primarily stored or used in the state. This is paid either at the dealership if you buy a car from a dealer, or at the county treasurer's office when you go to register your vehicle. Ultimately, KDOR is responsible for collecting motor vehicle sales and use tax from dealerships and from counties. We found the Department of Revenue had procedures to help ensure dealerships remit vehicle tax, but was missing several key procedures related to county tax remittance. KDOR had procedures related to training and guidance for counties and dealerships, as well as procedures related to monitoring and enforcement of dealerships. However, KDOR was missing several procedures related to the monitoring and enforcement of counties. In fact, one county didn't remit taxes for 15 months, resulting in about $11 million in delinquent taxes. Additionally, KDOR's lack of written procedures means efforts to ensure that individual buyers and dealerships are remitting aren't as effective as they could be. Finally, we found their database had significant errors, preventing us or them from doing any sort of statewide analysis. We did an economic development evaluation of the angel investor tax program. This one was from the angle of what do investors in the program and businesses that receive those investments say about how the program affects them. The Angel Investor Tax Credit Program incents investors to invest in Kansas startup businesses. In exchange for investing in a particular startup, the investor can receive a tax credit equal to 50% of their investment. So from 2015 to 2022, investors invested about $100 million and received $44 million in tax credits as a result. We surveyed them to see how the program influenced their behavior. So investors who responded to our survey told us the program caused them to invest more or sooner in participating businesses. And the businesses who responded to our survey told us the program helped them do more than they otherwise would have been able, such as hiring more staff or offering more products. However, we can't verify any direct impact. As part of this audit, we also evaluated whether Commerce implemented a process to ensure that the participating businesses stayed in Kansas as required by state law. They did have a process, but there was some room for improvement. We did a big audit reviewing community college athletic programs and scholarships. The questions were how much do they spend on sports and where do the athletes come from? So we did a sample, and the 3 community colleges we reviewed, Butler, Garden City, and Hutch, spend an average of $2.8 million annually in college funds, such as student tuition, fees, and public sources of funding, and other income and on athletic departments. Most athletic department spending was for coaching salaries and the sports of football and basketball. And the 3 community colleges we reviewed spent an average of $1.2 million annually in student fees and private funds on athletic scholarships. So we reviewed student-level data for 8 main sports at the same 3 community colleges from 2018 to 2022. Found that most student athletes are from outside of Kansas. As I recall, I believe it was about 2/3. Further, most athletic scholarships were awarded to student athletes from outside Kansas. Last but not least, reviewing the KPERS 3 retirement plan. This was from last February. I believe there have been some changes to the plan since then. But how does it compare to other options was the basic question. The KPERS 3 retirement plan was created to help improve the long-term sustainability of KPERS Trust Fund. It's a cash balance plan, so we compared it to other retirement plans, including defined benefit, defined contribution, and hybrid plans on some key metrics. We found that the KPERS 3 plan gives employees less flexibility and requires them to share financial risk and generally provides lower benefits than these other plans. And on the last 2 pages, there's just a preview of the ones we are currently wrapping up and will be releasing soon. There's a whole list there if anyone has any questions about that. And the last page of my handout is a little contact sheet with our website, my name and direct number on the last page. Again, this is the time to submit any audit ideas. So please reach out. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for the update. So the one that you found had lacked in paying the auto tax,
Yes.
was there a fine involved with that, or?
I don't recall. They have since paid. It's all been squared away now. I don't recall if there was a fine.
How can we let somebody go 12 months without paying anything? I mean, it's like somebody working at that department should say, we haven't received one for a month or 2 months or.
Yes, sir. That was kind of the lack of monitoring and
And on your KPERS 3, the KPERS 3 is actually better than, private corporation retirement accounts. I mean, the 401k type stuff, I mean, you invest and if it loses, you lose. KPERS 3, you never lose. And there's a guarantee of 4% return. So when you was comparing that, you was just comparing it to KPERS 1 and KPERS 2 because they were defined.
no, we looked at other states as well. I forget all of them, Utah, Oklahoma, a number of other state public source plans.
And do other states have that guarantee? If the market goes down, you still get 4%? And
some of them did, yes. Mhm.
Were there any particular that you think were something we should look at?
I'd have to go back and check again.
If you would, I think I'd be interested in seeing that.
Sure.
Committee, other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking, Auditor Clark, at the number of audits released or presentations in '24. Approximately how many audit reports does post-audit provide to the Legislative Committee, the post-audit committee in a year? In '24, it looked like there was 10, and I thought that was a little small.
Yes, this is not all of them, first of all.
Okay.
And second of all, this does not include IT security audit reports also. Normally, performance audits, 12 to 15-ish, and then IT security reports on top of that, which is another 6 or 8.
Okay. I appreciate your presentation, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you bringing our post-auditor before the committee, because I believe that our post-audit, Division of Post-Audit is way underutilized by the legislature. They do a great job on audits. Don't always agree with them, but I still think they do a great job. But we could do a lot better job as legislators if we would take their recommendations and implement several of their recommendations, because they have the ability to learn and find some things that the legislature just hasn't been able to learn and find. And I mean, some of these brief reports that she gave, I had questions, and I know Senator beside me had questions about how can this be like the $11 million, for example? Had auditors not looked at that, we'd have probably never had that made known to us. So I just thought I'd give a little bit of kudos because as a House member, I had the opportunity to serve, I think it was 8 years on post-audit, and it's a really valuable resource for legislature if we would use it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for those comments, and we do, and we appreciate, Chris comes every year here to give us updates, so we appreciate her. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I now have gained the pleasure of serving on post-audit, so I'm looking forward to that opportunity. I did want to mention, or have you mentioned, that first, or when you talked about the evaluating of the state water systems and wastewater treatment operator certification programs, and you mentioned working at the community colleges, but again, as Senator Peck mentioned, often the post-audit does help to bring forth the fact that they really are running into obstacles because there's a legislation that says they only can pay, what is it,
$25, I think.
Yeah, and that won't cover the costs for working with community college. So that's definitely is an obstacle to be able to use that resource. And just as Senator Peck said, this definitely brings forth that information that we should take that as an example of it would need legislation to make that happen.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just going to echo the sentiments from the chair and Senator Peck about how much I appreciate the work that you and your staff do. You do a phenomenal job, and I do appreciate the work that you do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is on the Osawatomie Hospital. So it talks about here the safety concerns, and I'm just curious if you could tell me, it's my understanding that OSHA contracts with one of the Kansas state agencies. They do the initial interview, then they report back to OSHA. Do you know which agency that is off the top of your head?
My guess would be KDADS, because they're in charge of the hospitals.
Okay. So in some of your reviews, has OSHA ever come in on some of these safety issues? I know they're real quick to come in on small businesses and other places, having dealt with them and heard nightmare stories on that, but I'm just curious.
I'll check, I'll have to check back in our notes on OSHA. I know the CMS comes in and does an evaluation.
I'd just be curious to see if the state gets a pass because the state does the initial work for OSHA. Just curious. Thank you.
And Senator, at Osawatomie, that's why we've had to remodel and we've had a limited number of beds because CMS's requirements on some of the issues that they found. Other questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your reports. All these reports that you've highlighted here are your summary. We can go in and on your website and download each one of these reports and get them in detail. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And just so you know, part of your influx of email that you get every day, when we release reports, everyone gets a copy. So you've all gotten copies of all these, but yes, they are all available on our website. I also will put a plug in. Each one has a podcast that goes with it. So a lot of legislators find that really helpful to listen while you're driving or on the treadmill or whatever it is. It's kind of a 15-minute recap of the audit, kind of in a question-answer format. If you don't want to read, it hits what were the concerns? What did you find? What does that mean? What's the impact? That sort of thing.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Our website is listed on that last page, on this page.
Senator Petty.
Glad Glad you mentioned the podcast because I did just listen to one yesterday. So it is a great way to follow up.
Anyone else? Seeing none. Chris, thank you a lot. Appreciate you being here today. Committee, I'd like to work a couple bills here this morning. Did we get packets for the ones from yesterday, Nancy? Okay, yeah. So, the packets from yesterday, there was a couple of them being, it was a snow day that part of the committee was here in person, and we didn't have enough packets for everyone, but it is online, so. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that topic, I had made some notes on one of mine, and I put my name on the tab. Do you know if you have that?
We do.
Okay, thank you. That's what I do on all of my pieces of legislation. I mark them up pretty significantly to help me remember when we get back to them.
And you did have your name on yours, and I forgot to grab it to bring it in. I meant to do that, but. We'll wait for 1 minute and she'll bring that packet in for Senator Peck, and then we'll start down the list. One that we did the other day, I think we'll start out with it, is 181. You should all have those packets. Okay, committee, we're going to start out with Senate Bill 181, which is limiting the annual amount of expenditures and demand transfers from the state general fund, requiring certification by the state treasurer, and providing for additional requirements on the governor's and legislator budget plans and legislative measures. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we move out Senate Bill 181 favorably for passage.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second by Senator Peck. Okay, discussion. Senator Petty.
Mr. Chairman, I know that we heard testimony in opposition to this from the Kansas Association of School Boards because of the impact it could have on adequate funding for our public schools. I also have concerns about tying the hands of future legislatures when it comes to the state general fund and limiting those transfers. So I am in opposition to this bill.
Any other questions or discussion? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate and understand the comments of the ranking member. However, when it comes to schools, they have an automatic built-in cost of living adjustment or consumer price index increase in their funding. So I guess I don't see that personally as an issue. Additionally, I asked the question during the hearing that if we had a situation that was an emergency, how would we address it? Well, my understanding is it's not that difficult because we can always use the notwithstanding language. So I think this is a good piece of legislation to try to rein in government spending. We haven't done a very good job over the years I've been a legislator of doing so this is a positive step in the right direction. So I appreciate the fact that we have the legislation introduced. I appreciate the fact that you had a hearing, and I appreciate Senator Fagg's motion. I need to pause while you answer that. I can.
That's okay.
Motion to pass it out favorably. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion or question? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have concerns, just even from the language in the bill, in terms of our ability to respond to natural disasters, pandemics. Hopefully, we don't have that again. But the big concern is that it could impact our ability to adequately respond, and maybe that's in the eye of the beholder to some degree. But I do have cautions and concerns in regard to the implications of this language and the ability to respond in case of events. Thank you.
Other discussion? Senator Petty.
I do think it's important for us to take in consideration that this is tying the hands of future legislatures, that they could not submit legislation reflecting the legislature's budget that would exceed the maximum amount of expenditures and transfers in the state general fund certified by the state treasurer. And it would also prevent us from proposing early debt retirement, which could affect long-term interest costs. So the ability for the governor or the legislature to make transfers in the budget stabilization fund or any other extraordinary measures. So I think this is questionable as to whether it's actually a benefit for the citizens of Kansas when we're tying our hands when we're planning our budgets.
Other discussion? Seeing none? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? Motion carries. Senator Petty, like to be recorded. Okay, committee, let's move on to Senate Bill 101, creating the Drug Abuse Resistance Education educator position for DARE, D-A-R-E. That's the one that's online. Okay. Does anyone want a copy of the bill brief? We can go grab some of them real quick. Okay. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the purpose and the intent of Senate Bill 101. However, I don't know why we would need to spend an additional $100,000 and an additional FTE for this educational program. I believe that educating children as it relates to the dangers of drugs, whether it's fentanyl, opioids, marijuana, go on down the list, where are the parents? Is it not the parents' responsibility to try to and help educate children? Where is the houses of worship, places of faith? What about the schools? We heard yesterday, one conferee said that they had asked some private school personnel about this particular topic, and they indicated that at their school, they will have about 10 sessions on this topic of the dangers of using and being involved in the drug industry. And we're not paying for that. If our public schools can't find the time to tell students, if the parents are not doing their job, if the church is not doing its job, that drugs are a danger. We see it on TV all the time, advertisements. We used to see a commercial with eggs. This is your brain on drugs, and it would fry the egg. Drugs fry brain, for example. My point is, I understand, my heart breaks for the family that testified yesterday, but I don't see how us adding an additional government position and spending an additional $104,000 plus of taxpayer money is going to change anything as it relates to this issue. So I wanted to voice my thoughts. And again, I appreciate the intent. I just don't think this accomplishes what we're told that it would accomplish. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a question. The DARE program today, as it exists today, who administers that program?
Staff will look it up real quick. The AG?
AG's office?
Correct.
And so
This would be an expansion, I
it's
guess.
an expansion of that. So with the AG's office, and I don't remember the exact number, but does the AG's office have some vacant FTEs today? And how many do they have approximately?
We're checking. They're thinking around 13.
13. And could they not absorb this position within those 13 positions that are unfilled?
I would think if you wanted to add that as an amendment, yeah. Maybe we'll just wait to work this in, and we'll find out those questions. Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I appreciate the comments from my colleague, Senator Peck, personally being around this, working with individuals in the community, even here in Topeka, I mean, this whole thing is a crisis, and I get it. The church should be more involved. Other people, parents should be more involved. But the reality of it is just one little pill is killing so many young people. And so I'm for this bill. I would probably take it a step further, but I'll leave that for another time so we can get this through. But I'm in support of this legislation.
Any other discussion? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Senator Peck. I think that when we look at the 13 FTEs that's open, It is a very important program, but we want to be careful about layering up and looking for cost efficiency and service effectiveness. And I think there's some other ways that this could be handled. I think the schools should be part of that. They got the resource officers around that. I think in my area, they do a really good job with this stuff. So it's one of these kind of things that ought to be, they understand the issues at the local level, and I think that can be another way to do this. Thank you.
Well, Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of a follow-up, again, drugs have been an issue. I've been around individuals that have dealt with, I've done a lot of drug counseling, but this is just so unique, this epidemic. And again, one little piece of a pill for a young kid, the cost of this and being intentional to get the message out, to me, just supersedes the time it's going to take to implement or find other ways. Anyhow, my thoughts.
Maybe I suggest if we work this, if we would put in there that, use existing resources, and if they're not available, that, they could come back and ask for an enhancement. I don't know. I'm just suggesting something. I mean, I think we all agree that it is important work, and I think if it saves one life, it's worth every penny. So, I don't know, maybe we could just wait on this one and do a little more research into options. I know there are some other funds around. Maybe we could look around, see if there's any other places other than SGF that we could fund this position. Maybe get some options there, and we'll have time to work this after turnaround. I mean, this is an exempt committee, so. Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those comments, and I'd be agreeable to see that. But just reminding again, for all the money we're trying to save, let's also remember the kids we're trying to save, and we're talking a little over $100,000. And sitting on this committee already, I've seen the money we've blown in so many ridiculous areas that it just doesn't make sense. And that's not to take away from my colleagues and the comments they have on this, but if we don't get intentional, every day the clock just ticks. And right here in our area, we see it, living here in Topeka, we see it all around our state. And anyhow, just final thought. Thank you for your time.
Well, I'm trying to see what the wish of the committee is here. Do you want to try to work this bill, or somebody want to make a motion, or what? Do you want to wait a while? What's everybody's feelings? We know Senator Clues. Senator Clues.
Well, I think it's something we could debate on the floor if we get it out. So I would just move that we pass this out of committee favorably.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I guess it dies because of no second. So we'll put this aside and try to come up with some ideas and see if we can't work this a little bit later. We'll see what we got for options. But Senator Clues, thank you, because I know this is near and dear to you, and it is to all of us. And I think we just need to figure out how we want to try to fund it. I've got a few ideas, so maybe we'll look into them. Senator Clues.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And I think if anything, it's good that we're at least addressing this and seeing what we can do. I think everybody wants to resolve. It's just trying to find what the best pathway is for that. So thank you.
Okay, I think with that committee, we are going to conclude our work for today.